Hey everyone, welcome to Great Lakes Church. My name is Carson, and I gotta tell you before we get into our weekly message that we're a community of people helping people find and follow Jesus. We're based out of Southeast Wisconsin. We have physical locations in Kenosha and Racine, but if you're listening to this or watching this, you've found our online presence. We share content on our YouTube and our podcast platforms wherever you listen, and we love that you're a part. If you want to know more about what's going on here at Great Lakes Church, you can find out more at greatlakeschurch.com or check out our central hub. But until then, everything you need is going to be in the description, so enjoy the message, and we'll catch you next time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a series called Voices. And so all summer long, we are hearing from different voices, different perspectives, different styles of speaking even. And I'm excited for you today to hear from my friend, Josh Petersen. Now, I actually met Josh not that long ago, and he was one of those guys that when I sat down with him, I was like, man, we have a quick connection here. We talked for a long time, and it just felt like it was such a life-giving conversation that I'm like, man, I want to know this guy more. So we've hung out some more, and here's the deal. I went to LinkedIn to learn a little bit more about him, and I realized this guy has done everything. He's been a service technician, repaired malfunctioning water pumps, and operated a well drilling rig. He has been a pastor of student ministries. He's been a lead pastor. He has been a mortgage advisor. He is now a vice president of mortgage lending. I mean, if you can think of it, this guy has done it. He is just shy of what Elon Musk has accomplished on this planet. So I'm excited for you to hear today from my new friend, Josh Petersen. Put your hands together and give him a welcome.
Officially, the first time I've ever been mentioned in the same sentence as Elon Musk. Wow, I feel honored. I want to tell you about a story that happened in my life not that long ago. In fact, it was just a couple months ago. A good friend of mine passed away, and I was invited to come officiate her funeral down in South Georgia. She had moved not long before her passing. So far South Georgia that it was almost Florida. It was right on that line, like the band, if you're a country fan. And I was really excited to go down. I've never really been in that neck of the woods. And the family said, well, good news, we put you up in a B&B. And I thought, oh, like an Airbnb. And they said, no, forget the air part. It's just a B&B, a bed and breakfast. And I've never been to a bed and breakfast before. I don't know if you have, but I really want to know if you've ever been to one in the South, because it is a different animal in the South. And so the son of the woman who had passed away said, it's at, here's the address, 1 Oz Way. You're going to go to 1 Oz Way. And I thought, Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man will all be waiting for me. They weren't. Just a woman named Betty. And you walk in the front door, and it's not like you check in at a desk and you go off to your room and turn on the Wi-Fi and leave the world behind. No. You get a tour of every room of the place. And it ended in the dining room. And what was so strange about this particular dining room was that there were 2 tables in it. Not 1, 2, which I thought was really, really strange until I realized that on each of the tables were 3 settings for tea. I don't drink tea. And as far as I knew, it was just me, the person I'd traveled down there with, and Betty. So why did we need 6 settings, and why not put them all at one table? And I asked that question, and Betty said, well, don't even worry about it right now. I'll tell you in a minute. First, we've got to get to the kitchen because you're in the South, and you don't just check in. We got to get to know each other because you're going to be here a few nights, and we're going to be family. And I was raised to believe that if you want to bring kin in, you go into the kitchen, and you cook together. And I thought, wait a minute, you're being paid to host me here, and I'm going to do the work. And she said, just come in and we're going to get to business. I just have one rule in the kitchen. We don't use the same spoon twice. It sounded fair until we started cooking, and I realized that I needed another tablespoon. And she said, only once. Use a teaspoon. I said, but I don't know how many teaspoons make up a tablespoon. She goes, yes, you do. Because you're at 1 Oz Way. And that Oz is for ounce. And in my dining room, there are 2 tables, because there's 2 tablespoons in every ounce. And each table had 3 tea settings because there's 3 teaspoons in every tablespoon. And now, sir, you'll never forget it. And you know what? I won't. And neither will you. And it doesn't even matter that that story never actually happened. I did go to South Georgia for a funeral, and I did stay at a bed and breakfast, but none of that other stuff mattered. I stole that off of TikTok and infused it into the story. But you'll never forget it. You might not remember what I say for the next 20 minutes, but you'll go home and you'll tell your friends, I now know how many tablespoons and teaspoons are in 1 ounce, because I took a very complex idea that's very difficult to remember and I put it into a story. There's an anthropologist, her name is Mary Catherine Bateman, and she says it this way: the human species thinks in metaphors and learns through stories. And I don't know about you, but that has been so true in my life. From a very young age, I learned that the best way to pass my history test was to put it to a song. And I learned that the best way to learn the notes on the piano that my mom was incessantly trying to teach me was to take all of those notes and put words in front of them and turn it into a story. I learned that the best way to remember anything was through a story, because a story has incredible power. My whole life, I've been taking those things, those complex, hard to remember ideas, and I've put them into story. This one word, S-T-O-R-Y, can make all the difference for you. And what I hope you hear over the next few minutes is that it can make all the difference for someone else too. In fact, if you don't hear me say anything else the rest of our time together, I hope you'll remember this. Story makes the incomprehensible a little more accessible. A lot of us in this room are not bakers, we're not people that cook. And so when we start talking about tablespoons and teaspoons, you just tune out and you forget about it because that's too complex. You just want to eat what's made. You don't want to deal with the making. And so if we take that story, it becomes something a little more accessible. Now, everybody that is a storyteller and has done this and helped kids learn this thinks that it was original to them or their mom. The truth is, they stole it from Jesus. Because Jesus was the master storyteller. In fact, that was his primary way of teaching everybody anything. No matter where he went, he told stories. In fact, Matthew, one of his followers that kind of wrote his biography, and we call it the Gospel of Matthew, this is how Matthew puts it. Jesus always used stories. Not sometimes, not every once in a while, not just when he was doing the kids' ministry at church, always used stories and illustrations like these when speaking to the crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without using such parables. Now, for a lot of the disciples, that ended up being a little bit confusing. But for me, and my guess is for you, as you read through the life of Jesus, it's the stories where you lean in a little heavier. You listen a little more intently. Because what Jesus is doing is taking something so huge, so beyond our understanding, and he's making it accessible. Reason being is most of his followers were relatively ordinary people. They were fishermen, and mixed in there were the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, well, they really liked arguments. They would have rather that Jesus pull out a flip chart and do diagrams and side-by-sides of verses and break it all down for them so that they could take that and either argue against him or then pass that argument on to someone else. But instead, he knew the fishermen needed something a little more practical. They needed something they could get their hands on and wrap their brains around. And that's been so good for me as a follower of Jesus thousands of years later, because most of my friends are more fishermen than they are Pharisee. I bet you'd say the same thing, that most of your family that you're trying to connect with Jesus are more fishermen than Pharisee. They don't need the big argument and the complexity and all of that. They just need something to get their mind around and their hands on. So what I want to do is take a look at a couple of the stories that Jesus told. Because if what I believe to be true is true, and that one of the most prevalent voices in our life is story, then we could learn an awful lot from a very simple one that Jesus told. In fact, he told it twice in just a slightly different way. So still in Matthew's gospel, this is what we read. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like." Now this is a metaphor, right? He's saying, you've got a definition and you've put some words around it, but I'm going to help you understand it just a little bit differently. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. And he goes on to say, in his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. And everybody standing around went, everything? Everything. You see, what's so interesting about this treasure is that everyone around there went, I know treasure. The kingdom of heaven concept is very far off and hard to understand, but I get treasure. I mean, I've maybe found a few coins loose, and I certainly understand walking around. And back in that day, in that place in the world, it was fields everywhere. So they knew what it was like to walk around fields. And so they're starting to identify what Jesus had done was he had anchored what he was going to teach in their reality. He understood who they were and where they were coming from, and he was going to build his teaching around what they already knew. And you got to know that they're going, well, I might do the same thing if I found something like that. Because what they knew is that, yes, the treasure had objective value. They could have pulled it up out of the ground if it was buried, and they could have taken it into maybe the pawn shop of the Middle East, right, and said, what can I get for this? And here's the price tag for this thing you could walk away with today, and it would have been great. But what's so interesting is that they already knew the value so much. This guy that found it, he buried it again. He didn't want anybody else to see it. He didn't want anybody else to stumble on it. And he knew that if he went to the owner of the field and was like, hey, I found this treasure in your field, finders, keepers, losers, weepers, the owner of the field would have gone, no, that's not how it works. You were trespassing. That's my treasure. So he buries it again. He sells everything he owns and buys the field. And he probably paid a pretty great price for that field, but it was worth it because of what it contained. So not only does this field have objective value, it has conductive value. What it touches has value. And here's what I think was beginning to happen is that all of the people, the men and the women, and maybe even the kids that were standing around are listening to what he's saying, listening to what this guy did as a result, and they're going, oh, it's like that? Oh, the kingdom of heaven is that valuable? The kingdom of heaven is that important? It's that big? Because if I found treasure, I would sell everything I had to get that treasure. You're telling me, Jesus, the kingdom of heaven is so great and it's so wonderful that it's worth everything? And Jesus went, everything. You see, what Jesus did was he used a story to make the incomprehensible accessible. If Jesus had gotten into all the technicalities of the kingdom of heaven, which sometimes as Christians we like to do because it's kind of fun and we get a kick out of it, but our friends and our family maybe get lost because this is not their primary hobby in life, their primary joy in life. But what Jesus says is, no, you can understand this too. This journey, this faith, this kingdom, you can approach it too. And they were beginning to understand that because of the story. Just in case it didn't click. My favorite disciple is Peter. Because Peter just needed extra all the time. If you know anything about Peter, he usually messed it up. And I'm grateful for that because I usually mess it up. I think he's the most approachable. And my guess is that in that moment, it's not recorded, but Peter was probably like, yeah, but Jesus, I have a thought. And Jesus was like, I got more story. Just hold on, Peter. I'm going to give it to you from a different angle so that you'll get it. And this is what he says. He goes on. It starts off almost the same way. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. So now it's not just some random guy walking through a field. It's a merchant that is purposely looking for something. He's on the lookout for choice pearls. And it goes on to say, when he discovered a pearl of great value, there's that phrase again, he sold everything he owned and bought it. It's interesting that the first guy kind of stumbles on it. He's not out looking for the value or the treasure or the pearl, but he finds it. And when he finds it, he understands its value. This merchant is somebody different. He is purposely searching. He's looking for it. And my guess is, according to Jesus' story, he's probably found pearls along the way. But this one is unlike any other one he'd ever seen. So much so that he's willing to pay the biggest price that anyone could possibly imagine for a pearl. I've never bought a string of pearls, but my understanding is they're not cheap. But you're getting what, 25, 30 pearls on that string. This guy, one pearl, just one, valued at everything. What in your life have you ever found where you're going, I would sell my house, my car, my baseball card collection, my dog, anything of value in my life, I will give it up for this one thing. There's not many things that I could list. In fact, I don't know that I could list anything. But finding something of that kind of value, I can imagine. And so I imagine that everybody standing around listening to Jesus went, I feel that. I feel that. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to win the lottery? Have you ever done the math? I mean, it's incredible. If you won the lottery and you didn't go do what a lot of people do and spend it all right away, you'd have a lot for a long time. And everybody standing there goes, man, if I found a pearl that was that valuable, right? They're starting to feel it. Because again, Jesus had anchored this story in something they would understand. I'm guessing, I don't know, but if Jesus were walking around in 2023 and he was telling a similar story, he might say, you were walking through the park and you found a winning lottery ticket, right? You would go, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. I'm starting to feel how great the kingdom of heaven is. And it's not because Jesus gave this great argument that no one can refute. He told an amazing, simple story. And that's what turned the light on, because story makes the incomprehensible accessible. And I'm convinced that's why Jesus told stories over and over and over again. And we know he told them over and over again because Matthew records him saying them, Mark records him saying them, Luke records him saying them, John records him saying them. He used story nonstop. And I've really had to wrestle through. As I raised 4 kids, I probably lean too much into, let me convince you, let me argue you to the ground so that you can't refuse the existence of God, which sounds really exciting and something everybody would want to be a part of, right? Versus doing what Jesus did and just sharing a story, anchoring it in their reality so that they could understand. Because here's what I know to be true. Before Jesus told the story, no one could fathom. No one. No one could fathom how great the kingdom of heaven is. Even today, as smart and as advanced as we are, there is no possible way for us to comprehend how amazing heaven is, how amazing the full kingdom of Jesus is, what that means. I mean, we sing songs, we read scripture, we go to Bible study, we have groups, we listen to other sermons on podcasts and all of these sorts of things, but we're still trying to get our head around it. And back in that day, no one could fathom either. But here's what I also know. After Jesus told the story, no one would forget. No one would forget. Because he'd taken this big thing and he turned it into this simple thing that they could carry around with them. I wonder how many times that story got told. How many times did someone come up to Peter down the road? Again, it's not recorded in Acts, but I imagine someone came up to Peter and said, hey, you were with Jesus. I mean, what's the kingdom of heaven like? And Peter probably went, well, it's like a man who was walking through a field and he found a treasure. I bet Matthew did the same thing. I bet Thomas did the same thing. And maybe by the end of the story, what they did is, and I am that guy. I'm that merchant. I found that treasure. And you know what? It's worth everything. Now, here's the bad news for you and me as followers of Jesus in the 21st century. Jesus is not around physically to keep telling stories. He's not. But you are. You are still around. And you might go, wait a minute. I'm not a storyteller. That's just not my gig. I'm a truth teller. I don't wrap that up in a nice sugary bow and hand it over to somebody so that they can swallow the pill that they don't want to take, right? That's just not me. I leave the storytelling up to my dad, and by the way, he tells the same story over and over again, right? But the good news is you don't have to be a storyteller. You know why? Because you are the story. You are the story. You are a living, breathing story of the greatness of the kingdom of heaven and Jesus. We say all the time that we want to be, at least we said it when I was growing up, we want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And we've been told, you might be the closest thing that your friends and your family ever get to Jesus. Here's what's underneath all of that. You are the greatest story that Jesus ever told. And the cool part is, he is still telling it. And followers of Jesus have always been Jesus' favorite story. And those stories are how we got here. But let me give you a couple examples. If you go back to the Gospel of Matthew, there's this moment where Jesus walks up to the beach and he's calling his first disciples. And the part where we're going to look at is where he's calling Peter and Andrew, two brothers that were fishermen. And you may know this story well, but listen how this goes. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets. Now make sure you read. They left their income, their livelihood, their everything, their way of life at once and followed him. They gave up everything for Jesus. Imagine what their friends said. Peter, come on, man. I mean, you've done a lot of crazy things in your life, but you're going to give up fishing to go follow this rabbi from, we don't even know for sure where he's from. He's talking crazy. Andrew, you're the sensible brother. Come on. No, we found this treasure, and it's worth everything. In a lot of ways, Peter and Andrew are the guys that are just walking through the field, and the treasure kind of found them. And then there's Paul. Paul, in case you didn't know, used to be called Saul, and he was a Pharisee. And Pharisees were always on the lookout. They were always on the lookout for things of great value when it came to God and spiritual things. That was kind of their job. And you know that one day Paul found Jesus. And this is what we read. Yes, this is Paul's words. Yes, everything else, everything but Jesus, is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. And then he goes on to say, for his sake, I've discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage, so that I could gain Christ and become one with him. He's the merchant, and he found the pearl, and it was worth everything. And 2,000 some odd years later, we are still telling Paul's story. And we're still telling Peter's story. And those stories help us understand the most incomprehensible truth that Jesus loves us. And that the kingdom is worth everything. You see, story makes the incomprehensible just a little more accessible. So my question for you, and the question that I have been wrestling with so intently for this last season of my life, is what story are you telling? When people see you and they interact with you, or they think about you, what's the narrative that's running through their minds? What story are you telling with the words that you say? What story are you telling with the way that you work at work? What story are you telling with the things that you post? What story are you telling with the way that you give of your resources, whatever they may be, financial, time, talent? What story are you telling when you show up in the thick of the hardest moments of others' lives? Maybe a better way of putting it is, what story is Jesus telling through your life? And is it a story that Jesus would tell? See, here's reality. This Christianity thing, I'll say it out loud. It's really, really hard to get sometimes. There are parts of the scriptures that are so complex and so overwhelming that we sometimes just skip by them. And there are times where people have sat me down and they've asked me questions that I'm going, I don't know the answer to. It can be so literally incomprehensible. But your friends and family have you. And your life, your story, back in the old days we used to call it our testimony, that's relatable. Right? That's a connection point for you and your friends. They may not be able to get the kingdom of heaven, but your story, what God has done in your life, what he is doing in your life, they can approach that. Think of it as like a Venn diagram of sorts, right? There's some overlap there. There's some places where you come together and they go, oh, it's like that? Oh, he's like that? I can get that. I can get that. I feel that. Don't forget that. You may not have all of the answers, but you know how to tell your story. That part of it we get. We know how to go, it's kind of like, or there was this one time, or this happened to me, and you're never going to believe what happened next. They may not want to listen to Jonah in the belly of a fish, but they may want to listen to you and how God took you from some of the hardest, scariest moments and rescued you in ways you couldn't have imagined. Because here's reality. Your story might be the story that changes everything for them. Your relationship with Jesus, the hands and feet of Jesus, you being like him, your story might be the story they never forget and that changes everything. So tell it. Tell it. And you don't need to go to an evangelism class. You just have to share you. Invite them over. Show them your home. Tell them how you grew up. Tell them the places where you struggle. Have a conversation. And your friends and family, like the fishermen and so many followers since, have gone, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know he was like that. I get that. We all learn, and we all grow, and we all stretch through story. So make sure you tell yours. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, there are so many moments, I'm guessing, in each of our lives where we've felt like we wanted to share this part of who we are, our faith, our relationship with you. We've wanted to share that with someone else, but we've always felt like we're not the person to do it. We don't know enough. We're not trained enough. We can't recite enough. And I've just felt this urge from you to go, just tell them your story. It's what you did so often. So in that way, will you help us to be like you? And help us to understand that our story, while some stories are really crazy and they're huge turnarounds where we came from really down in the dark pits of life and we've come to this place of healing with you, and others of us have grown up in the church and we've always been in church and we're still in church and not a lot has changed, and we might feel like our story is not going to have an impact on anybody. But you remind us today that we are your greatest story. So help us to be bold enough and gentle enough and humble enough to just share what you've done in our lives so that our friends, our family, our communities, our kids, our parents can know you so that they can know you. We love you so much. Thank you for loving us. Amen.
Thanks for joining us here at Great Lakes Church. Again, my name is Carson, and I'm so glad that you chose to share some time with us this week. We hope something in this talk was meaningful to you, encouraging to you, and maybe even something worth writing down that you can go share with a friend. If you'd like to get involved, maybe join us at one of our physical locations in Southeast Wisconsin, or just be a part of our many other goings-on our social platforms or events in the area. Check out greatlakeschurch.com.